Let me tell you something about audacity. It doesn't walk up to your front door and knock politely. It rolls up in a yellow cab at 8 in the morning, drops two bewildered children on your porch, and speeds off before you even have time to put your slippers on. I am 68 years old, and if there is one thing I have earned in this life, it is my peace. My name is Brooklyn Baxter. I spent 35 years working 12-hour shifts as a pediatric nurse at Mercy General, raising 3 boys on my own after my husband, Arthur, passed away from a sudden heart attack. I scrubbed floors. I stretched penny pinching into an Olympic sport, and I made sure every single one of my sons graduated college with their heads held high. Now, I live in a quiet, paid-off brick house in the suburbs. My garden is thriving. My joints only ache when it rains, and my time belongs entirely to me. I love my grandchildren fiercely. Lord knows I do. But I am out of the child-rearing business. I am a grandmother, not a free, on-demand daycare center. That brings me to my youngest son, David, and his wife, Chloe. David is a good man. He's got Arthur's broad shoulders and his soft, forgiving heart. Sometimes that heart is a little too soft, especially when it comes to the woman he married. Chloe is, well, if I'm being honest, Chloe is exhausting. She's one of those modern mothers who spends more time curating her life for social media than actually living it. Everything has to be an aesthetic. Her house is a museum of beige furniture that you can't sit on. And she's always talking about her mental load and self-care journeys. I try not to judge. Every generation has its struggles, but Chloe has a habit of making her struggles everyone else's emergencies. The trouble started on a Thursday evening. I was sitting in my favorite floral armchair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, packing my bags in my head. My sister, Loretta, and I had been planning a trip to a massive gospel choir convention in Atlanta for 6 months. We had non-refundable tickets, a fancy hotel booked downtown, and reservations at a soul food restaurant we'd been dying to try. My flight was scheduled for Friday at noon. At 7:30 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. I took a deep breath, pasted a smile on my voice, and answered, "Hey, Chloe, everything all right?" "B, I am literally at my breaking point," she said. "No, hello. No, how are you?" Just straight to the dramatics. I could hear the clinking of a wine glass in the background. "I need you to take Leo and Maya this weekend. From tomorrow morning until Sunday night." I blinked, taking a sip of my tea. "Chloe, you know I can't do that. Loretta and I are leaving for Atlanta tomorrow morning. We've had this planned since January. Where's David?" "David is in Chicago for that IT conference." "You know that," she huffed, her voice dripping with impatience. "B, you don't understand. I am burnt out. I have an opportunity to go to a wellness retreat in Sedona with a couple of girlfriends. It's a last-minute cancellation, and I got a spot. If I don't go, I'm going to lose my mind. I need a weekend to just be." "I sympathize with your burnout, Chloe." "I truly do," I said, keeping my tone level. "But I cannot cancel a trip I've paid over $1,000 for because you found a last-minute retreat. Why don't you call your mother?" "My mother is playing in a golf tournament," Chloe snapped. "Bae, they are your grandchildren. Family is supposed to step up. I can't believe you're choosing a choir over my mental health." I felt that familiar, hot spark of irritation flare up in my chest. Over the years, I had bitten my tongue until it bled for the sake of keeping the peace with this woman. I had smiled when she insulted my cooking. I had stayed quiet when she demanded David buy her a luxury SUV they couldn't afford. And I had taken the kids countless times when she was overwhelmed by a single afternoon of parenting. But I was not about to be bullied out of my vacation. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," I said, dropping the sweet grandmother routine. "I love Leo and Maya, but a lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow at noon. I cannot watch the children." There was a thick, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," Chloe finally said, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. Just, wow. Thanks for nothing, Brooklyn. She hung up. I set my phone down on the coffee table, exhaled a long breath, and shook my head. I felt a twinge of guilt. That's the curse of being a mother. You always feel guilty, but I pushed it down. I had set a boundary. I was proud of myself. I finished my tea, double-checked my suitcase, and went to bed, assuming that was the end of it. I should have known better. Friday morning broke with a heavy, grey overcast and a steady drizzle of rain. I was up by 6 a.m., humming to a gospel record playing softly in the kitchen, frying up some bacon and eggs. My suitcase was sitting by the front door. Zips closed, a brightly coloured luggage tag tied to the handle. Loretta was going to pick me up at 9:30 a.m. sharp to head to the airport. At 8:15 a.m., I was rinsing my breakfast plate in the sink when I heard a heavy knock at the front door. I frowned, wiping my hands on a dish towel. I wasn't expecting any packages. And Loretta was never early. I walked down the hallway, peered through the peephole, and my heart dropped straight into my slippers. Standing on my front porch, getting misted by the morning rain, was a man in a damp windbreaker holding a crumpled white envelope. Standing right beside him, looking smaller than ever, were my grandchildren, 7-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Maya. Between them sat a single, bulging navy blue duffel bag. I threw the door open, the hinges screaming in protest. "Can I help you?" I demanded, looking from the man to the children. Mrs. Baxter?" the man asked, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He pointed a thumb over his shoulder at a yellow city cab idling in my driveway. "I'm Ray. I'm the cab driver. I was paid to drop these kids off at this address." I stood frozen, the dish towel slipping from my hands. "A cab driver?" "The lady at the house across town," Ray said, holding out the envelope. "She paid me $50 cash up front. Gave me this note to give to you. Look, lady, I'm just doing my job. She said you were their grandmother and you were expecting them. I made sure they got the seatbelts on and everything." I looked down at Leo. He was gripping Maya's hand so tightly his little knuckles were white. Maya was shivering, her bottom lip trembling, clutching a stuffed rabbit by the ears. They looked terrified, confused, and utterly abandoned. The white-hot rage that flooded my veins at that moment could have powered a small city. "Come inside, babies," I said instantly, my voice softening as I ushered them out of the damp cold. "Come on in. Get warm." I turned back to the driver. He looked guilty, even though he was just a pawn in this mess. "You left a mother's house, and she just put her 2 small children in a car with a stranger?" Ray rubbed the back of his neck. "She walked them to the car, buckled them in, handed me the cash and the note, and went back inside. Had a suitcase of her own rolling down the driveway. I'm sorry, ma'am. If I'd known there was drama, I wouldn't have taken the fare. It's not your fault, Ray." I sighed, pulling a $10 bill from my housecoat pocket and pressing it into his hand. "Thank you for getting them here safely." I closed the door, locked it, and leaned my back against the heavy wood, closing my eyes for a brief second to gather my strength. When I opened them, Leo and Maya were standing awkwardly in my foyer, staring at my packed suitcase. "Grammy," Leo said, his voice small and shaky. "Mummy said you were taking us to the zoo this weekend. Are you going somewhere?" "The zoo." She had lied to them too. "No, sweetie." I lied smoothly, plastering on a warm, reassuring smile. I kicked my suitcase behind the coat rack. "Grammy was just doing some organizing. Have you two had breakfast?" Maya shook her head, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her chubby cheek. Mommy was in a hurry. She yelled at Leo to find his shoes. "Well, let's get you into the kitchen." "I've got bacon," I said, helping them out of their damp jackets. Once they were seated at the kitchen island, munching happily on toast and bacon, I retreated to the hallway with the crumpled white envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I almost tore the paper inside as I pulled it out. It was a piece of lined notebook paper, written in Chloe's looping, pretentious handwriting. Bay, I know you said no, but I am desperate. If I don't go on this retreat, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. You said yourself that family steps up. I'm holding you to that. They are your blood. I packed enough clothes for the weekend. I'll be back Sunday night to pick them up. Tell them I love them. Chloe. I stared at the note, reading the words over and over until they blurred. She had actually done it. She had called a taxi, put her babies inside, and shipped them across town like discarded Amazon returns, all to force my hand. I looked at my watch. 8:40 a.m. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Loretta. She answered, on the second ring. Hey, B. You ready? I'm throwing my makeup bag in the trunk right now. Loretta, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I can't go. What do you mean you can't go? Are you sick? Chloe dropped the kids off, I whispered, turning my back to the kitchen so the children wouldn't hear. She put them in a cab and sent them to my house. She's gone. Loretta let out a string of profanities that would have made our late pastor blush. She did what? Bay, you call the police. That is child abandonment. I can't call the cops on David's wife, Retta. The kids are already traumatized enough. I can't have squad cars pulling up and putting them in the system. I have to stay with them. Loretta sighed. A heavy, heartbroken sound. I'm coming over. Forget the trip. No, I insisted firmly. You go. Take your daughter. Enjoy the convention. I'll handle this. After convincing my sister to go without me, I hung up and dialed Chloe's number. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed David's number. Voicemail. He was probably mid-flight to Chicago or sitting in a seminar. I walked back into the kitchen. Leo and Maya had finished their breakfast. I grabbed their navy blue duffel bag to take it to the guest room to get them settled. As I hoisted it up, it felt strangely heavy on one side. I unzipped it to pull out their clothes. Instead of nicely folded pajamas, it was a mess, clearly packed in a frantic rush. T-shirts shoved in with dirty socks, a missing toothbrush, but sitting right on top of the clothes was an iPad. It belonged to the kids. They played educational games on it, but it was linked to Chloe's Apple account for family sharing. I tapped the screen just to see if it had enough battery for the kids to use later. It lit up, entirely unlocked, and right there, glowing brightly on the lock screen, was a banner notification. An iMessage that had synced from Chloe's phone just minutes ago. It wasn't from a girlfriend. It wasn't about a wellness retreat in Sedona. It was from a contact saved as Greg, Jim. The message read, "Just boarded. Can't wait for our weekend in Miami, babe. So glad you ditched the kids. The hotel has a jacuzzi in the room." I stopped breathing. The kitchen clock ticked loudly on the wall. The rain patted against the window pane. I read the message a second time. A third time. My daughter-in-law hadn't dumped my grandchildren on my doorstep to go heal her mental health. She had abandoned them in a taxicab to go cheat on my son in Florida. I looked up, staring down the hallway at the two innocent children giggling over a plate of bacon in my kitchen. The sadness I felt earlier evaporated, completely burned away by a cold, calculating fury. Chloe had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. She wanted me to step up? Oh, I was going to step up, all right. But when I stepped down, her entire world was going to be crushed beneath my heel. There is a specific kind of clarity that washes over a mother when her child is being threatened. It doesn't matter that David was 32 years old, standing 6'2" in his stocking feet. He was my boy. And this woman was making a fool of him while treating his children like excess baggage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the iPad across the room. I simply took a deep, stabilizing breath, walked into the kitchen, and poured the children tall glasses of orange juice. "All right, babies," I said smoothly, pulling out a fresh box of crayons and a stack of printer paper. Grammy needs to make a few boring, grown-up phone calls. I want you two to draw me the best pictures you can of your favorite animals at the zoo. Can you do that for me? Leo, bless his sweet heart, nodded earnestly. I'm going to draw a cheetah. They go super fast. And I want a pink elephant. Maya chirped, already grabbing a magenta crayon. Once they were settled at the kitchen table, entirely engrossed in their artwork, I took the iPad into my home office and shut the heavy oak door. I sat down at my desk, put on my reading glasses, and went to work. I felt less like a retired nurse and more like a private investigator. I opened the iMessage app first. The thread with Greg, Jim, was right at the top. I scrolled up. My stomach turned with every swipe of my finger. This wasn't a spontaneous weekend fling. The messages went back 6 months. They talked about meeting up at cheap motels on the edge of town while David was at work. They complained about the kids being in the way. But the worst part? The absolute most sickening twist of the knife. Chloe was financing this little romance with David's money. There were messages about her transferring funds from their joint savings account to her personal Cash App to pay for Greg's golf clubs. I switched over to her Apple Mail app. It didn't take a genius to search the word Miami. Up popped the flight confirmations from Delta Airlines. 2 first-class tickets to Miami International. And beneath that, a reservation confirmation for a 3-night stay at the Fontainebleau, one of the most expensive luxury oceanfront hotels in Miami Beach. I grabbed my own cell phone and opened the camera, taking clear, undeniable photos of every single screen on that iPad. I photographed the flight details, the hotel reservation, the receipts, and a dozen of the most damning text messages. I wasn't going to let Chloe gaslight her way out of this. When I had enough evidence to sink a battleship, I locked the iPad, set it on my desk, and dialed David's number. He didn't answer. He was likely in the middle of a keynote speech at the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago. I didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, I sent him a single text message. David Arthur Baxter. Step out of your conference and call your mother immediately. It is a family emergency. The kids are safe, but you need to call me now. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom? What's wrong? Are Leo and Maya okay? His voice was breathless, panicked. The kids are fine, David. They are sitting in my kitchen coloring, I said, keeping my voice steady and firm, the way I used to when he'd scrape his knee as a little boy. But I need you to go find a quiet room where nobody can hear you. Tell me when you're alone. I heard the sound of heavy doors opening and closing, his footsteps echoing on a tile floor. Okay. I'm in a family restroom. Mum, you're scaring me. What's going on? Why are the kids with you? Chloe said her mom was taking them so she could go to a yoga retreat. Chloe lied to you, baby, I said softly. I hated being the one to break his heart, but the truth is a band-aid you have to rip off quickly. I laid it all out for him. I told him about the phone call the night before, how I had refused to cancel my trip to Atlanta. I told him about Ray, the cab driver, showing up in the rain with his 2 terrified children and a crumpled envelope. She put them in a taxi? David asked, his voice cracking. The sheer disbelief in his tone shattered my heart. By themselves? Mum, they're 5 and 7. I know, David. But that's not the worst of it. I took a breath. She packed their iPad. It synced to her phone. David, she's not at a wellness retreat. She's on a flight to Miami with a man named Greg. Silence. A long, suffocating silence stretched across the line from my house in the suburbs all the way to Chicago. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Greg from her CrossFit gym? Yes. I heard a ragged exhale, followed by the sound of a fist slamming into something hollow, probably a paper towel dispenser. I knew it, he choked out, the betrayal turning into raw agony. I asked her about him 2 months ago. She called me insecure. She told me I was suffocating her. I took pictures of everything, David. The hotel receipts, the text messages. She's been using your joint savings to pay for his things. They are staying at the Fontainebleau in Miami Beach. I'm flying home, he said instantly, his voice hardening into something cold and unrecognizable. I'm coming back right now. I'll call the police. I'll have her arrested for child abandonment. No, you will not, I interrupted sharply. Listen to me, David. You are not flying home. The children are safe with me. They think I'm taking them to the zoo this weekend. If you come storming back with police, you will traumatize them forever. They do not need to see their mother hauled away in handcuffs. You need to handle this smartly. Then what do I do, Mum? He pleaded. You get on your phone right now and you book a flight from Chicago to Miami, I instructed, my tone absolute iron. You go to the Fontainebleau. You catch her in the act. You take your own pictures, you cut off every credit card that has your name on it, and you serve her notice to her face. You gather your proof for the divorce lawyer so she doesn't get a single dime of your pension or primary custody of those babies. He breathed heavily into the phone. I could hear the gears turning in his head, the heartbreak solidifying into resolve. Okay, David said. Okay, Mom. Send me the screenshots. The rest of Friday and the entirety of Saturday required an Academy Award-winning performance from me. I was the fun, carefree grandmother. I took Leo and Maya to the local petting zoo just like Chloe had promised, buying them overpriced churros and letting them feed the goats. We baked chocolate chip cookies from scratch, turning my pristine kitchen into a flour-dusted disaster zone. We built a blanket fort in the living room and watched Moana twice. Every time Maya asked where Mummy was, I smiled warmly and said, Mummy's getting some rest, so she can be super strong when she comes back. I made sure they felt nothing but absolute love and security. They didn't shed another tear after Friday morning. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles south, my son was executing the hardest task of his life. David had booked a direct flight to Miami, landing late Friday night. He checked into a cheap motel a few miles down the road from the Fontainebleau, biding his time. We texted constantly. He had already called his bank and frozen the joint checking and savings accounts, transferring the remaining balances to a private account in his name only. He cancelled the primary credit card Chloe carried in her purse. By Saturday afternoon, David was ready. He walked into the sprawling, opulent lobby of the Fontainebleau wearing a pair of dark sunglasses and a plain polo shirt. According to his texts, he slipped the concierge a $50 bill and spun a story about trying to surprise his wife, Chloe Baxter, for their anniversary, asking if they were at the pool or the restaurant. The concierge, charmed and tipped, checked the system and casually mentioned that Mrs. Baxter and her guest had just ordered drinks to their cabana at the adults-only pool. David walked out to the pool deck. The Miami sun was beating down, the air thick with humidity and the smell of expensive sunscreen. He spotted them easily. Chloe was wearing a brand new designer swimsuit, undoubtedly bought with David's money, lounging on a white daybed. Greg, a bulky, overly tanned man with a tribal tattoo on his shoulder, was leaning over her, laughing and feeding her a piece of pineapple from a cocktail skewer. David didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked up to the edge of their cabana, pulled out his smartphone, and snapped 3 crystal-clear photographs with the flash on. Chloe jumped, startled by the flash. She pulled her sunglasses down her nose, squinting up at the tall man standing in the shade of the palm tree. When she realized who it was, David said the color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost in a bikini. David, she gasped, scrambling to sit up, nearly knocking her $30 cocktail onto the pristine white cushions. What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Chicago. Greg looked between them, sudden panic flashing in his eyes as he realized he was staring down a furious husband. He slowly slid to the far edge of the daybed. I could ask you the same thing, Chloe, David said, his voice deadly calm. How was the wellness retreat in Sedona? Did you find your zen? David, wait! I can explain, she stammered, pulling a towel over her chest, her eyes darting around the crowded pool deck to see who was watching. It's not what it looks like. Greg is just. He's a friend. We ran into each other. Save it, David cut her off. He didn't raise his voice, but the venom in it was unmistakable. I've seen the iPad. I've read the messages going back 6 months. I know about the motels. I know you've been draining our savings to buy this meathead golf clubs. Greg opened his mouth to speak, puffing out his chest. Hey man, back off. David didn't even look at him. He just held up a hand. Speak to me, and I will drown you in that pool. Stay out of this. Greg wisely snapped his mouth shut and looked at his feet. David turned his attention back to his wife, who was now hyperventilating, real tears welling in her eyes as her perfect, curated life crumbled around her. I'm filing for divorce on Monday, David said flatly. I've already frozen the joint accounts and cancelled your credit cards. Have fun paying for this luxury suite. Oh, and by the way, leaving my children in a taxicab with a stranger? You'll be lucky if you ever get unsupervised visitation again. The kids! Chloe shrieked, suddenly remembering her lie. They're at my mother's. David, you can't take my babies. They aren't at your mother's, Chloe, David said, turning on his heel to leave. They're with my mother. You know, the woman you thought you could bully? You played the wrong family. And with that, David walked away, leaving her sitting on the daybed with a worthless credit card and a ruined life. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter while I was helping Maya wash flour off her hands. The caller ID flashed Chloe's name. I dried Maya's hands, kissed her forehead, and sent her into the living room to join her brother. I picked up the phone, swiped to answer, and pressed it to my ear. Hello? I answered, my voice dripping with sweet, southern hospitality. B! Chloe sobbed into the receiver, sounding utterly hysterical. B, you have to help me. David is crazy. He showed up in Miami. He's threatening to take the kids. Please, you have to talk to him. Tell him I was just stressed. Tell him I made a mistake. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking out the window at my peaceful, rain-washed garden. Well, Chloe, I said smoothly, dropping the sweetness entirely. I'd love to help, but as I told you Thursday night, family is supposed to step up, and right now, I'm stepping up for my son. B, please! He cancelled my cards. The hotel is demanding a card on file for incidentals, and my debit card keeps declining. I don't have a way to pay for my flight home. I smiled. A slow, grim smile that she couldn't see, but I knew she could feel through the phone. Like I told you, Chloe, I said, my voice as cold as ice. A lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Enjoy the mental load. I hung up, blocked her number, and went back into the living room to watch Moana with my grandchildren. Before I tell you exactly how this miserable weekend concluded, I have a confession to make. Up until this very moment, I've been using fake names to protect both the guilty and the innocent. I thought I owed her a shred of dignity. I thought, despite everything she had done, I should shield her identity because she is, for better or worse, the woman who carried my grandbabies. But if you are going to sit here and listen to my truth, you deserve the real, unvarnished details. The time for protecting her fragile reputation is over. My real name is not Brooklyn. I am Jalen Baxter. My son, the man with a heart of gold who deserved so much better than the hand he was dealt, is Trevion. My late husband was Robert, and the woman who tried to play my family for an absolute fool, her real, legal name is Vanessa. Her lover was a man named Bradley, and my sweet, innocent grandchildren are Jackson and Lily. I think it is only right that the universe knows exactly who dropped those babies on my porch like discarded mail. By Saturday evening, Vanessa's situation in Miami had unraveled into a spectacular, humiliating catastrophe. Without Trevion's hard-earned money funding her fantasy, Bradley showed his true colors almost instantly. He wasn't a dedicated partner. He was a parasite who enjoyed being spoiled by a woman spending her husband's paycheck. The moment he realized the luxury oceanfront suite was no longer paid for, and that Vanessa couldn't even afford a poolside margarita on her frozen cards, his deep emotional connection to her vanished into the humid Florida air. He didn't offer to cover the room. He didn't offer to buy her dinner. He simply marched up to the suite, packed his gym bag, muttered something cowardly about her bringing too much drama into his life, and took a rideshare to the airport. He left her completely stranded at the Fontainebleau. Vanessa spent the entirety of Saturday night sitting in the opulent, marble-floored hotel lobby, still wearing her damp designer swimsuit with a complimentary towel wrapped around her shoulders, frantically calling every contact in her phone. She begged her friends for a loan. But word travels fast in our circles, and nobody wanted to fund the fallout of her adultery. With the hotel management threatening to call security because her card kept declining for incidentals, she finally had to swallow her immense pride. She called her own mother, the one supposedly playing in a high-stakes golf tournament, to wire her just enough money for a cramped, middle-seat flight on a budget airline back home. While she was desperately trying to orchestrate a way out of Miami, Trevion was already taking absolute control of the narrative. He flew back on the earliest Sunday morning flight, coming straight from the airport to my house. I will never forget the look on my son's face when he walked through my front door. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, aged by 10 years in a single weekend. But the moment he saw Jackson and Lily sitting on the living room rug, building a tower out of wooden blocks, he fell to his knees. He pulled them into a hug so tight and desperate I thought he would never let them go. He didn't shed a single tear in front of them. He just kissed their foreheads, told them how much he loved them, and promised them with a fierce, unwavering certainty that everything was going to be perfectly fine. Then, he left them safely in my care and went straight to a downtown office building to meet with a ruthless family law attorney he'd managed to retain on a weekend emergency rate. Trevion wasn't playing defense anymore. He was going on the offensive. He laid out the mountain of evidence on the polished mahogany conference table. He had the high-definition photos of her and Bradley lounging at the Miami pool. He had the bank statements proving she had been siphoning marital funds for months to finance an affair. And most importantly, he had the original handwritten note she had given to the cab driver, explicitly admitting she was abandoning her 5- and 7-year-old children to go on a trip despite my clear refusal to watch them. No judge in their right mind was going to look at that timeline and side with her. The temporary order was reviewed and signed by a judge late Sunday evening. Trevion was granted immediate, sole physical custody of Jackson and Lily. When Vanessa finally showed up at my house late Sunday night, she was the picture of sheer defeat. She was not greeted by the sound of her children's laughter. She looked completely disheveled, exhausted, heavily sunburned, and was dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel up my driveway. She marched up my front steps, expecting to simply collect the children, offer a half-baked apology, and go back to her comfortable life, as if nothing had happened. Instead, she was greeted by Trevion. He stood tall and immovable on my front porch, illuminated by the harsh glare of the porch light, flanked by his attorney. "Where are they?" Vanessa demanded, her voice shrill and trembling, trying to push past his broad shoulders into my hallway. "I want my kids, Trevion. I've had the worst weekend of my life. Just let me take them home. They are asleep in my mother's guest room," Trevion said. His voice was completely devoid of the warmth and patience he used to reserve for her. It was cold, detached, and utterly final. He reached out and handed her a thick, heavy manila envelope. "And they won't be going home with you. You don't live there anymore. Your name isn't on the deed, Vanessa. I've already had the locks changed." Vanessa frantically tore open the envelope, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon of the restraining order and the emergency custody mandate. The reality of her choices finally crashed down on her. She collapsed onto her knees right there on my cold concrete porch, wailing loudly enough to echo down the quiet suburban street. She begged, she pleaded. She grabbed at the hem of Trevion's jeans, blaming her mental health, blaming the stress of motherhood, and even trying to blame me for not being supportive enough. But Trevion didn't flinch. He just looked down at the woman he once loved, turned his back, walked inside my house, and firmly shut the heavy oak door. The deadbolt clicked with a sharp, echoing finality, leaving her out in the cold night where she belonged. The divorce that followed was brutal, but exceptionally swift. The hard karma she had earned came down like a judge's gavel. The court did not take kindly to a mother abandoning her children in a taxicab to finance an illicit affair. Vanessa was stripped of everything she thought she was entitled to. She didn't get alimony. She didn't get a share of the house. She was granted supervised visitation with Jackson and Lily every other weekend and ordered to pay child support based on her potential earning capacity. Today, Vanessa's reality looks very different. She lives in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, a far cry from the sprawling suburban home she used to constantly complain about. To pay off the massive credit card debt she racked up during her affair, she works a miserable administrative job she absolutely hates. There are no more aesthetic social media posts. There are no more luxury SUVs, expensive lattes, or weekend wellness retreats. The high-class life she tried to steal crumbled to dust beneath the weight of her own vanity. As for us, we are thriving. Trevion sold that museum of a house, wiping the slate completely clean, and bought a beautiful, cozy place just 10 minutes down the road from me. Jackson and Lily are doing wonderfully. They still talk about the epic blanket fort we built that weekend, entirely shielded from the ugly truth of their mother's actions. And as a heartfelt thank you for stepping up, protecting his children, and securing his sanity, Trevion completely paid for my sister and me to go to the gospel choir convention in Atlanta the following year, booking us first-class tickets and a luxury hotel. I got my peace back, and I never had to answer the door for a taxi ever again.